There is a place on this planet where the sand stretches further than most countries are wide, where the heat is so absolute that the ground cracks like old porcelain, where almost nothing lives and almost nothing moves. We call it the Sahara, the great empty, the edge of the inhabitable world. But there's something strange buried beneath all that silence. Rock carvings, ancient ones, scattered across the stone floors of cliffs and valleys deep inside the desert. Images of elephants, hippos, cattle, crocodiles, images of rivers, of rain, of people swimming. The Sahara wasn't always a desert, and the question that follows that fact, the one that changes everything, is this: what would the world look like today if it never became one? To understand what we lost or what was taken, we have to go back about 11,000 years. The last ice age had just ended. The northern ice sheets were retreating, and as they did, they shifted the atmospheric systems that govern rainfall across the entire planet. Africa's monsoons, the seasonal rains that today stop well south of the Sahara, crept north, further north than they've gone in recorded history. And with that rain came everything else. Grasslands rolled across what is now bare stone and shifting dune. Lakes appeared, real lakes, enormous ones. Lake Chad, for instance, was once the size of the Caspian Sea. Rivers carved through valleys that are now completely dry. Forests pushed into the margins. This period has a name among scientists. They call it the African Humid Period, or more informally, the Green Sahara. It lasted for nearly 5,000 years, and during those 5,000 years, people moved into the Sahara in enormous numbers. They herded cattle, they fished, they built communities along shores that no longer exist. We know this because they left things behind. Not just rock carvings, though there are thousands of those, but bones, pottery, hearths, tools, burial sites. The Sahara was not empty. It was one of the most populated regions on the African continent. And then, around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, the rain stopped, not all at once, slowly, irreversibly. The monsoon shifted back south, the lakes shrank, the grasses dried, the people, and there were a lot of them, had nowhere to go but toward the remaining water, toward the Nile. Some historians now believe this mass migration, thousands of people, over generations, funneled into the Nile Valley, may have been one of the critical catalysts for the rise of ancient Egyptian civilization. The desert, in other words, didn't just erase a world, it may have created another one. Now comes the harder question, the one worth sitting with. What if those monsoons had never retreated? What if the Green Sahara had persisted, not for 5,000 years, but for 10,000, 20? What if the largest desert on Earth had remained a vast living landscape right up until today? Let's think about this carefully, because the implications aren't just environmental. They reshape every piece of human history that came after. Start with the population. The Sahara covers roughly 9 million square kilometers. That's an area larger than the continental United States. During the Green Sahara, parts of it supported human population densities comparable to those of the Nile Valley. Extend that across 5,000 years of continued fertility, and you're imagining a region that could have sustained tens of millions of people, cities, trade networks, civilizations. We have no name for what might have grown there because it never got the chance. Think about what it would mean geographically. A Green Sahara connects sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean in a way the desert does not. The Sahara has functioned for millennia as a barrier, not impenetrable but significant. Trade routes existed certainly, caravans crossed it, but they crossed it at enormous cost. Remove that barrier, replace it with rivers, grassland, and navigable terrain. Suddenly, the transfer of ideas, goods, plants, animals, and people between Central Africa and the Mediterranean world becomes dramatically easier. The cultures that we think of as separate, North African, Sub-Saharan, Mediterranean, may have been in continuous fluid contact. The genetic, linguistic, and cultural exchange would have been profound. And here is where it gets stranger still. The crops that fed the ancient world, wheat, barley, lentils, spread slowly westward and southward from the Fertile Crescent. They moved through regions that could support them. A Green Sahara would have been a conduit, not a wall. Agricultural civilization might have taken root across Central Africa thousands of years earlier than it did. The timeline of human development on the continent, already one of the most complex and underappreciated stories in history, would look entirely different. And then there is the ecological piece, which is quietly enormous. The Sahara today is one of the largest sources of atmospheric dust on Earth. Billions of tons of it are lifted into the air each year and carried across the Atlantic, where it fertilizes the Amazon rainforest. It's a strange, counterintuitive loop, the desert feeding the jungle from 3,000 miles away. In a Green Sahara, that dust is largely absent. The Amazon receives less fertilization. It may be smaller, less biodiverse. The Atlantic Ocean's chemistry shifts. Weather patterns across the entire hemisphere adjust. The planet we're imagining isn't just North Africa with grass. It's a fundamentally different Earth. Here is what makes this thought experiment genuinely unsettling. Egypt, the civilization we tend to treat as the cornerstone of the ancient world, the pyramids, the pharaohs, the elaborate mythology, the writing system that influenced everything that followed, may owe its very existence to the death of the Green Sahara. If the Sahara hadn't dried, the population pressure that pushed people into the Nile Valley may not have existed. The density, the competition for resources, the need for centralized organization, the very conditions that tend to produce complex civilization might have been absent. We might never have had ancient Egypt, not in the form we know it. Which raises a question that has no clean answer. Is it possible that ecological collapse, real devastating collapse, sometimes creates the conditions for something extraordinary to emerge from the wreckage? There's a similar argument made about the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, a catastrophic, multi-generational breakdown of nearly every major Mediterranean civilization caused by drought, invasion, and systemic failure. Out of that collapse came the conditions that eventually produced classical Greece. History doesn't always move forward in comfortable lines. Sometimes it folds back on itself in ways that feel almost cruel. A Green Sahara might have produced something magnificent, or it might have produced something so different from what we know that we simply can't imagine it from where we're standing. That's the strange edge of this kind of thinking. We can trace consequences forward, but we can't predict emergence. We don't know what a world with a living Sahara would have valued, believed, built, or become. We only know what was lost when the rain stopped. There is one more layer to this, and it's the one that pulls the story into the present. The Sahara is not static. Satellite data from the past several decades show something that researchers are still working to fully understand. Parts of the Sahara's southern edge are getting greener. Rainfall has increased in some areas. Vegetation is returning in places it hasn't been seen in living memory. This is sometimes called the re-greening of the Sahel, the semi-arid belt that borders the Sahara to the south. It's happening partly because of shifting rainfall patterns, and partly because local communities have invested in traditional land restoration techniques that were nearly forgotten. Farmers in Niger, for example, have regenerated tens of millions of trees by protecting and carefully managing wild growth, a practice so effective that it has transformed entire landscapes and improved food security for millions of people. It's a small thing, measured against the vastness of the Sahara, but it is real, and it raises an entirely different version of the question we started with. Not, what if the Sahara had never died? But, what if it came back? There are serious proposals, not fringe ideas, but work being done by climatologists, ecologists, and engineers, exploring whether large-scale reforestation of the Sahara is even possible, whether wind farms and solar installations across the desert could, over time, alter local humidity enough to encourage rainfall, whether the Green Sahara is not only history, but a destination. 11,000 years ago, the world made a choice. Not a human choice, a climatic one. The monsoons moved, the rain disappeared, a living landscape turned to stone and sand, and from that loss came consequences that echo through everything we think of as civilization. The question of what might have been is, in a sense, unanswerable. We can model the rainfall, we can estimate the populations, we can trace the migrations, but we cannot know what a world with a Green Sahara would have built, or believed, or become. What we can do is hold the strangeness of it. The fact that beneath 9 million square kilometers of desert, there are lake beds and river channels, and the carved images of animals that have not lived there in 5,000 years. The Sahara remembers what it was, and somewhere in that memory, there might be a map.